The biggest fraud checks in UFC history. That's what we're here to talk about today, guys. And when I say fraud check, take that term loosely because some of these guys lost to like championship caliber fighters, and I just feel like their skill set in one way or their aura got fraud checked. So it doesn't mean that they're necessarily overall like a complete fraud, just maybe an aspect of the fighter themselves got fraud checked. But some of these are complete frauds as well. So let's get right into the video, starting off with Darren Till. Listen, Darren Till, one of the biggest fraud checks in UFC history. This guy came into the UFC, guns blazing, Muay Thai background, just destroying people on the feet. He had aura. He was a huge welterweight. And, man, Tyron Woodley was the champion at the time. Darren Till, 17-0, 5-0 entering this fight with Tyron Woodley. He had just beat Wonderboy in a nearly all-striking battle. Arguably lost, but he beat Wonderboy. He had aura, like I said. And coming into the fight with Woodley, people were like, man, Woodley, Woodley's getting up there in age. He's 37. Darren Till is a new gun. Darren Till is going to come in here and he's going to destroy Woodley. Boy, were they wrong. Darren Till, I believe, landed one strike in this fight. He got absolutely brutalized on the feet by Woodley. I think he got elbowed and dropped in the second round and then into a Dorsch choke after John Anik said Darren Till not to tap in tight, and then goes ahead and taps to Tyron Woodley, which fair enough, Tyron Woodley was an underrated champion, but Darren Till, let's just say, guys, one of the biggest wastes of talent we'll ever see in the UFC, just because this guy was undisciplined. I mean, just look at his UFC career. He spammed left hands. He didn't train, came into fights fat. So Darren Till's fraud check probably could have been avoided. Maybe if he was more disciplined, and maybe if he started his career at middleweight. Who knows? But he definitely got fraud checked by Tyron Woodley at the time. Like I said, guys, I know it's a championship fight, but Darren Till got fraud checked. And yeah, let's move on to the next one. Ronda Rousey. This might be the biggest fraud check in UFC history. Ronda Rousey going into her fight with Holly Holm was 12-0 with 12 finishes. I think 10 of those in the first round. Rousey was on top of women's bantamweight, on top of the world, the most dominant fighter in women's MMA history. She was finishing everybody. She was touted as one of the best strikers in the UFC at one point. Even some people saying that she can outstrike Floyd Mayweather and beat some of the men fighters, which was pure delusion. This was Joe Rogan pushing a lot of this narrative. She goes into the Holly Holm fight super cocky, super confident. Obviously, I mean, why wouldn't she be? She's 12-0 with 12 finishes. But Holly Holm gave her a reality check and said, hey, your striking isn't good. I am a world-class boxer. Watch this head kick. And Holly Holm was a boxer, not even a kickboxer. And she landed a head kick on Ronda Rousey, put her out cold. And yeah, Ronda Rousey never won another fight after that. This was one of the biggest fraud checks in UFC history, as I said, because people were blowing up Rousey's striking to be like the most incredible thing ever, and just because she knocked out Bethe Correia, who was awful. And listen, Ronda Rousey was great for her time, but I think her striking was always overrated. Edmund Tarvernian going, head move it! Well, yeah, you guys get the point. Ronda Rousey, a legend for sure, but she definitely got fraud checked. Her striking got fraud checked by Holly Holm, we'll say. Let's move on to the next one in this video. We got Johnny Walker. Now, if you guys remember Johnny Walker coming into the UFC, this guy was on a hot streak. 3 finishes in the UFC, all under a minute. He got like a 15-second KO over like Justin Leday. He destroyed Misha Serkinov, I believe, in like 32 seconds. And then he destroyed Khalil Rountree. This guy was on a hot streak. People were like, man, this is going to be the guy to beat John Jones. 6'5", athletic, huge. But Johnny Walker ran into the biggest problem, his own chin. And he came into a fight with Corey Anderson. And the narrative going into that fight, man, Corey Anderson has pillow hands. Johnny Walker is going to destroy this guy. It's going to be easy money. He's going to fight for the title and fight John Jones. It was crazy. And what do you know? Of all people to fraud check this guy, Corey freaking Anderson rocks Johnny Walker, lands a huge shot on his chin. And eventually, after landing a bunch of huge shots, the ref has to step in to save Johnny Walker. And yeah, man, Johnny Walker has never been the same fighter since that Corey Anderson fight. I hate to say it. This guy's chin is shot. I don't think he ever really had a chin. There's old clips of Johnny Walker getting dropped in like boxing against like an amateur. So yeah. Johnny Walker was fraud checked back in the day against Corey Anderson. I think this was in like 2018, 2019. And yeah, man, in 2024, it's sad to see Johnny Walker taking KO after KO loss. I hope this guy either finds a different gym, moves up to heavyweight, or retires, because I don't want to see these guys get knocked out over and over, unless it's Bilal Muhammad. Bring it on. Either way, let's move on to the next fighter on this list. We got Paulo Costa being fraud checked by Izzy Adesanya. Listen, the Eraser Paulo Costa, We all remember what happened. He was 13-0 in the UFC. This guy had aura if we've ever seen it. He was a jack guy. I mean, he looked the part. I mean, this dude looked like he looked like the Incredible Hulk, the Brazilian Incredible Hulk, coming into his fight with Israel Adesanya. He had all the aura coming off that fight with Yoel Romero. Was one of the only guys who was willing to trade with Yoel Romero, throwing hammers. They dropped each other. People were like, man, there's no way that Israel Adesanya is going to be able to do anything to the brute force of Paulo Costa. The lead up, Paulo Costa seemed like he was winning some of the verbal exchanges and getting Israel Adesanya annoyed. But on fight night, we know what happened. Paulo Costa got absolutely embarrassed by Israel Adesanya, and he even got humped after the fight, which was a huge hit to his ego. He then claimed after the fight that he was drunk off of wine from the night before, which even if you were, why are you drinking wine before your UFC fight? Either way, Paulo Costa got fraud checked by Israel Adesanya in the championship fight. Yes, I know people are going to say it's not a fraud check because he's fighting the champion, but it's a fraud check in the sense that he was like this brute force who was looked to just walk through Adesanya because he was knocking out everybody and had just faced the scariest guy in Yoel Romero and wasn't scared to back down. So they were like, what is Izzy going to do to this guy? And man, Israel Adesanya took Paulo Costa's soul. He's never been the same guy since. And here's a fun fact for you. Paulo Costa does not have a single win over anybody in the UFC that's signed to the UFC right now. So there's that. But respect to Paulo Costa. He got the secret juice. He's entertaining. Let's move on to the next one, guys. We got Edmund Shabazi. And this guy was like the Ronda Rousey's new guy for Ronda Rousey's coach, Edmund Tarvernian. This guy came into the UFC red hot, no pun intended because he looks like he's a ginger. Red hot, 11-0, 4-0 in the UFC, coming into the fight against Blonde Brunson, who was a different beast. Coming off of a brutal finish over Brad Tavares. If you remember that head kick finish over Brad Tavares this guy got, they were like, man, this guy's for real. Coming into the Derek Brunson fight, the narrative, I believe, was that he was going to destroy Derek Brunson. Derek Brunson was old, sloppy on the feet. Shabazi would just get a KO. And man, were we wrong. Blonde Brunson put a beating on this dude. He took him down, and I think he eventually got a TKO on the ground, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it was a submission. A TKO on the ground. And man, let me say, ever since that loss, Edmund Shabazi just never been the same. I don't think he's ever had great coaching or a great gym he's trained at, and he just doesn't seem to be developing as a fighter. He just keeps dropping fights. He's won some fights in between the Brunson loss, but yeah, he definitely got fraud checked by Brunson just because of how dominant and like dangerous he was looking. And then he goes up against the greatest gatekeeper of all time at middleweight, Derek Brunson, and Derek Brunson just, I don't want to say steamrolls, but he didn't have much problems beating Edmund Shabazi. And so, yeah, definitely a fraud check in my opinion. Let's move on to the next one. We got Giga Chad. Now, personally, for me, this was a very satisfying fraud check just because of the amount of crap Giga was talking leading up to the fight with Calvin Kattar. He was talking about how Volk and Max was scared of him and how Volk needs to fight him. And, like, bro, pipe down. First of all, look at Giga's physique. He looks like Mr. Clean, the Georgian version. But listen. He was going into his fight with Calvin Kattar, and I think he overlooked Calvin Kattar, to be honest, because he was talking about fighting Volk, how people in the division were scared of him, and what do you know? He got his ass beat by Calvin Kattar. Calvin Kattar put on a striking clinic against this guy who was supposed to be touted as like one of the best strikers in the division. Calvin Kattar beat his ass, pillar to post, made him look silly, and yeah, man, now Giga's old. He's like 36 years old, and I don't think he's going to be that guy anymore. He's not going to be that same guy that destroyed Edson Barboza. He's just not. He got fraud checked. He's older now. It's in the lower weight classes, so yeah, maybe he shouldn't have been talking all that smack against while he's fighting Calvin Kattar, talking smack to the champion. Focus on the fight ahead of you, but respect to Giga. He was trying to make it entertaining, so I do understand that, but he definitely got fraud checked by Calvin Kattar. Let's move on to another one. Another fraud check. We got Shawn Brady being fraud checked by Belal Muhammad. Now listen, this it's a tough day to be Shawn Brady when you're the only TKO win of Belal Muhammad's UFC career. This guy got finished on the feet by Belal Muhammad. Just let that sink in. Belal Muhammad finished you on the feet. Now, all jokes aside, guys, Bilal's good, but he's not known for his knockout power or his striking, like amazing striking technique. He's got solid striking, but Bilal's known for his takedowns and his wrestling. And I think what got exposed or fraud checked by Shawn Brady was his striking. Shawn Brady is a grappler, right? And the narrative going into this fight is that what happens if Shawn Brady can't take down Belal Muhammad? How does his striking look? And we got to see he does not have very good striking. If this guy cannot get his grappling going, he's chopped liver on the feet, and Belal Muhammad proved too much, busted him up on the feet until the ref had to step in. Yeah, he just got brutalized. He was undefeated in his career and 5-0 into the UFC coming into this fight. So And yeah, dominant grappler. But like we said, if he wasn't going to be able to get Bilal to the ground, which is tough because Bilal's a great wrestler, he was going to have a tough night. And yeah, his striking got fraud checked by Bilal Muhammad, I'd say, and shown to not be very good. But he's bounced back since then, so respect to my boy, Shawn Brady. Let's move on to the next one in this video. We got Grant the GOAT Dawson. Now listen, Grant Dawson coming into his fight with Bobby Green, he was 20-1 in the UFC. That's crazy. 20-1 with an 8-0. Now, granted, he wasn't the most impressive. He was kind of just smudge grappling guys into a decision or a rear naked choke finish. Kind of a boring fighter, but this guy was 20-1, 8-0. Going against Bobby Green, the journeyman. No one thought that Bobby Green had a chance. Everyone thought that Grant Dawson was just going to take Bobby Green down and destroy him on the ground, just like Islam Makhachev did. And boy, was everyone wrong. Some people say this was a fluke. I say that Grant Dawson's striking maybe got exposed and he just made a technical error that got him caught. Bobby Green caught him with a big shot and finished him, I think, 32 seconds into the fight. This win kind of shot Bobby Green into a little bit of a superstardom run. Bobby Green was on top of the world after this win. He just sparked the young up-and-comer who was undefeated in the UFC. It was a great win for Bobby Green. But I will say respect to Grant Dawson. If you look at the way he took this loss, he took it like a champ on the chin. He actually made some jokes about himself getting knocked out. And yeah, even in his last fight, he had a moment where like he made a joke about his wife, which was great. So Grant Dawson actually has a pretty underrated personality. He's a funny guy. And yeah, respect to him for bouncing back. Let's move on to the next person that got fraud checked, Adrien Ganz. Now, I don't know what it is about Adrien Ganz. Maybe I'm just a hater, but I never liked this guy. He just came off as way too cocky and like, I don't know. He just seemed like it's just like the little smart ass. You know what I'm saying? Adrien Ganz, good fighter, one of the best boxers at bantamweight at the time. I guess you could still say he is, but he kind of fell off. He was 5-0 in the UFC, 16-3, coming into his fight against Rob Font, and he had just TKO'd I think it was Tony Kelly, and they talked a bunch of smack back and forth to each other. So he got that win over Tony Kelly, and this guy was red hot in the UFC, 5-0, I think 4 finishes. And he comes in against Rob Font, the grizzled vet, Rob Font, 36 years old. People were like, man, how's Rob Font going to do against this young buck? Is Rob Font's boxing going to be enough to outdo Adrien Ganz' boxing? And boy, was it. Rob Font stood in the pocket, caught Adrien Ganz, I think, with a beautiful right hook, sent him down to the canvas and finished him on the ground. And then this guy went on to get finished by leg kicks by Jonathan Martinez. He has bounced back since then, but Adrien Ganz, he got fraud checked, man. What can we say? He was touted to be one of the best boxers in the bantamweight division, and Rob Font said, hold my beer, brother. I'm the best boxer at bantamweight. And Rob Font's still doing the damn thing at like 37 years old, still fraud checking these young guys like Kyler Phillips. So respect to Rob Font. He's doing his thing. He fraud checked Adrien Ganz, and yeah, life goes on, brother. Let's move on to the next one, Abus Magomedov. Now, this was a mild fraud check. Nothing crazy. This guy only had one win in the UFC coming in to his fight with Sean Strickland. Actually, whenever this fight was announced, people were like, why is this guy fighting Sean Strickland? Who is Abus Magomedov? Most of us were like, what is this fight? Because why would Sean Strickland take a fight against an unknown guy? But nonetheless, man, even if you're coming into the UFC only 1-0, this guy had a 25-3 record, which is quite insane in my opinion. 25-3, I believe. Somebody might have to fact check me on that. But 25-3 record's quite insane in MMA in general. So, and his last name is Magomedov, so he comes from that region of the world. You know this guy was going to be good. But Sean Strickland showed that this guy has no gas tank. Sean Strickland fraud checked Abus Magomedov's gas tank. After the first round, which he looked amazing against Sean Strickland, he gassed out. And then Sean Strickland in the second round just beat him due to his exhaustion and just TKO'd him on the ground. And good win for Sean Strickland. Showed that Sean Strickland has an elite gas tank, and if you can't get him out of there in the first round, you're not going to out-cardio Sean Strickland. You just won't. So, yeah, Abus Magomedov's gas tank got fraud checked, but he came back. He's had a win or two since then, and, yeah, he's looking better in his career. Seems to be pacing himself better in his fights, so that's good. Let's move on to the next one. In this video, we got Joe the Salty Man Pyfer. Now, look at this guy's face, guys. Tell me Joe Pyfer isn't the saltiest guy you've ever seen. I mean, I could just feel the sodium chloride coming off this guy's face. So damn salty. But listen, even towards his fans, this guy's salty. He's mad at the world for nothing. Joe Pyfer, Dana White loves this guy. He was homeless whenever they found him and got him on a Contender Series. He got some knockouts and they got into the UFC. Look, respect to Joe Pyfer. He has insane power. So they thought. I think his power was a little bit overrated because he did like a punching challenge and they said he did better than Francis Ngannou. So he was touted as like one of the craziest punchers in the UFC. Going into his fight with Jack Hermanson, 12-2, 3-0 in the UFC, all finishes, I believe. And yeah, I think the narrative going into that Hermansson fight is Joe Pyfer's way too powerful, and yeah, he's gonna probably get Hermansson out of there round 1, round 2. But Hermansson put on an absolute boxing clinic, boxed the beard off of Joe Pyfer. Joe Pyfer was all busted up after this fight. He was salty on the mic after. He was like, "You guys are haters. You'll never be in my position. I made it to the UFC, so I'm a winner every time." Which, fair enough, is a good mindset. But Joe Pyfer remained salty. I feel like even if he won, he'd have been salty. This dude's just a salty man. But Joe Pyfer was fraud checked by Jack Hermansson, showing that his striking is a little underdeveloped and needs some work. So his striking got exposed and fraud checked by Jack Hermansson, I would say. Nonetheless, Joe Pyfer's still a good fighter. I think he can bounce back, and I think he can still get some solid wins in the UFC and maybe even become like a top 12, top 8 fighter in the division at middleweight. But let's move on to the next person on this list, Benoit Saint-Denis. This is one of the worst ones in recent memory. Now, I know he just had the fight against Renato Moicano where he got completely destroyed. One of the worst beatdowns you'll ever see. But let's talk about the original fraud check by Dustin Poirier. Coming into the Dustin Poirier fight, he lost his UFC debut, but then he went on a 5-fight win streak, all finishes. 13-1, 28 years old. People were talking about this guy, Benoit Saint-Denis, like he was going to go up and challenge Islam for the belt. Like he was dangerous. He had underrated grappling. He had good power on the feet. But going into the fight with Dustin Poirier, listen, he beat Dustin Poirier pillar to post in the first round. But Dustin Poirier hung in there and ended up knocking out Benoit Saint-Denis because Benoit Saint-Denis does not move his head. He keeps it on the center line, and he paid for that against Dustin Poirier, who has really good power. Listen, it was Dustin Poirier's turn to fight the up-and-comer. He had kept rematching guys like Gaethje. He was fighting guys like Michael Chandler, Gaethje, Oliveira. That was just like the trio of fighters were fighting each other. And it was time for a new up-and-comer. And Dustin Poirier held his spot against BSD. Looked impressive doing it. People thought that BSD was going to destroy Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier, 35. People were saying he's past his prime. He's not hungry anymore. But he proved it otherwise. And Benoit Saint-Denis will go down as one of the worst fraud checks in UFC history in the modern era, in my opinion, just because of how highly people looked at this guy. And yeah, I hope he can bounce back, man. But it's tough. After that loss to Moicano, it's like, what can he do? He only has 6 years of MMA training, fighting at one of the toughest divisions in lightweight. So it's like he can't really do much, to really, these guys train a lifetime. 6 years of MMA training just isn't enough. So I don't know, man. We'll see. It's tough for Benoit Saint-Denis, but we'll see what he does going forward. Good luck to him. Good luck to him. Let's move on to the next one. We got Roman Kopylov. Now, Roman Kopylov, the real Chase Hooper, we'll say. The Chase Hooper of middleweight. This guy was 12-2 coming into his fight with Anthony Hernandez, 4-0 all finishes, and yeah, some of the best striking in the middleweight division, which is funny because he's the Russian guy, so you normally think these guys have insane grappling, but no, this guy is actually an insane striker, Roman Kopylov, really good striker. Anthony Hernandez coming in, relatively unknown. I knew of him because, hardcore out here. No, I'm kidding. Anthony Hernandez just goated. And underrated cardio, and yeah, he weaponized his cardio against Roman Kopylov and ended up getting him to the ground and just choking him out. And yeah, Anthony Hernandez fraud-checked Roman Kopylov's grappling, I'd say, because Roman Kopylov's grappling isn't the best. He was taken down in some of his UFC fights, but Anthony Hernandez was able to capitalize and get the finish on him. So I believe Roman Kopylov has bounced back since then, so I think he still has a bright future ahead in the UFC. He just got to work on that grappling defense, and yeah, maybe he can do some good things with his amazing striking, guys. Let's move on to the next one. We got Mike Malott. Now, this is horrible. Listen, if you're a Canadian MMA fan or from Canada, I feel bad for you because Mike Malott was Canada's only hope, and granted, let's be real, guys, he even before he lost to Neil Magny, he never really seemed like this otherworldly guy. I mean, he knocked out Mickey Gall, but outside of that, what has he really done in the UFC? He's got a win recently, but listen, man, coming into his fight with Neil Magny, this guy was 10-1, 3-0 in the UFC. I think 3 finishes. Might have just been 2 finishes in the decision. Either way, how do you get fraud checked by Neil Magny, dude? I'm disappointed in Mike Malott. He let down the whole country of Canada. He blew his wad against Neil Magny. I think he was destroying Neil Magny in the fight, and he blew his wad. Neil Magny got on top of him, TKO'd him in the 3rd round, I believe. This is so embarrassing, dude. I'm sorry, but you cannot be losing to Neil Magny in 2024. In the last, 3 years, if you're losing to Neil Magny, it's embarrassing. And it's just like, come on, dude. What happened, Mike Malott? You're better than Neil Magny, dude. 99% of the roster is better than Neil Magny. I mean, come on. Look what Carlos Prates just did to him. That's what Mike Malott should have did to him. Either way, I kind of felt for Mike Malott after that fight because I do think he's still the better fighter. He just had low IQ and blew his wad and got TKO by the veteran Neil Magny. What can we say? He bounced back since then, but listen, I don't think this guy's ever going to be a top 10 fighter or welterweight. He just isn't well-rounded or disciplined enough, in my opinion, and he has questionable cardio. So, yeah, respect to Mike Malott. Best of luck in his future, but I think it's going to be a tough one for him. Let's move on. We got Ikram Aliskerov. Now, Ikram Aliskerov, you already know what he is. He's one of the boys. I forgot if he's from Dagestan, but he is from that region of the world, and he has that aura, you know? This guy was 15-1, 2-0 in the UFC with 2 knockouts in the UFC, brutal knockouts at that. Coming in to his fight with Robert Whittaker. Granted, it was on short notice, and it is Robert Whittaker, so a lot of people are going to say this isn't a fraud check, but like I said, take that phrase with a grain of salt for the sake of this video. Ikram Aliskerov, still dangerous, well-rounded. His only loss to Khamzat Chimaev back in the day. This guy had hands, he had underrated grappling, and yeah, on the Saudi Arabia card, he steps up to fight Robert Whittaker. People are unsure what's going to happen. Whittaker is the long perennial contender in the middleweight division. Is Ikram going to be able to come into the fight with Whittaker and do his thing and show that he's that next level? He's that next Dagestani or Russian guy that can take over at the top. And nope, Whittaker ended up keeping it on the feet with him. And yeah, Whittaker caught him with a head kick and then eventually slapped him with an uppercut. It was one of the best feel-good moments of the year. I know a lot of people were looking forward to Ikram Aliskerov's build-up and maybe a rematch with Khamzat, but he did. I'd say his striking got fraud checked by Robert Whittaker. Some people were saying that Robert Whittaker was going to get exposed by Ikram Aliskerov, but I didn't think so. I thought that Whittaker was good enough to win the fight, but some people had that narrative. Either way, Ikram Aliskerov, still a great fighter. I think he can bounce back from the Whittaker loss and come back. And yeah, man, how good is Khamzat Chimaev after what Whittaker did to Ikram? So, yeah. Let's move on to the next one in this video. We got Michel Pereira. Now, Michel Pereira, he's been in the UFC for a while, so this one's interesting. A lot of people are going to say it's not a fraud check since he's lost in the UFC, but when you consider the streak he was on and what he was doing to guys at middleweight, I'd say this is a fraud check. Michel Pereira, coming into his fight with Anthony Hernandez, was on a 8-fight win streak, finishing everybody. Listen, he was in the middle of that win streak. He was fighting at welterweight, and he was struggling to make the weight, so he said, you know what, I'm going to go up to middleweight. And he went up to middleweight, and his first 3 fights, he got 3 quick finishes. Like, this guy was using that welterweight skill to make these middleweight fighters look like complete pipsqueaks and just complete jokes. But he ran into the brick wall that is Anthony Hernandez. How good is Anthony Hernandez, by the way? Fraud checking 2 people on this list recently in the modern era. But yeah, he ran into Anthony Hernandez, and listen, we learned that Michel Pereira is a one-pump chump, meaning he only has cardio for the first round. If you get out of the first round, this guy literally has no danger. And Anthony Hernandez showed that, beating him pillar to post after the first round, all the way into the 5th, where he eventually got a TKO. Not to be disrespectful to Michel Pereira, but his cardio looked absolutely embarrassing. I think he got fraud checked in terms of his cardio, and he got shown levels in the middleweight division that, look, if you're going to come up in the middleweight division, if you can't just be a one-pump chump. You got to be able to fight outside the first round unless you're Khamzat, because Khamzat has been to decision. But Michel Pereira's cardio got fraud checked by Anthony Hernandez, who has the best cardio in the middleweight division, in my opinion. I think Michel Pereira can bounce back, but he's just one of those guys that is so explosive. It's like, can he really fix his cardio? You know, he's so damn explosive. It's like, what can he really do? Change his fighting style? I don't know. He's an exciting fighter. He does the backflips and the flashy stuff, but I don't know, man. I don't know if this guy's capable of having good cardio, considering how jacked and like just explosive he is. But he's almost like a Michael Chandler of middleweight with worse cardio. Just dangerous in the first round, always looking to get you out of there with one shot, or maybe even like bulldoze his way to a submission. Either way, he got fraud checked by Anthony Hernandez. Let's move on to the next one in this video. We got Rebellis to Spain. Now, this guy might be one of the biggest fraud checks in UFC history. Listen, this guy was the Cuban Missile, the Cuban, I think he was the Olympic medalist in like kickboxing for Cuba. I could be wrong on the sport, but he was an Olympic medalist in something of a striking background for Cuba. 87-inch reach, longest reach in UFC history. 5-0, 1-0 in the UFC coming into his fight with Waldo Cortez Acosta. And listen, this guy was coming off a 4-second knockout before he entered the UFC, a 15-second knockout win against Josh Parisian. But Rebellis of Spain ran into this funny thing we call grappling, and he doesn't know how to grapple. So he was easily, the second you can avoid this guy's big shots, which I do think his power was a little bit overrated, because he landed some shots on Waldo Cortez Acosta. And Acosta took him pretty well. And yeah, Rebellis of Spain got exposed for having literally negative grappling. This guy might have some of the worst grappling in UFC history. He's on like the Tai Tuivasa grappling level, if you know what I'm saying. That blob grappling level. And yeah, after 2 losses in the row in the UFC, they actually cut him. But yeah, I think this guy's a fraud check just because they were like, man, this guy's potentially the next Francis Ngannou. He's going to knock everybody out. 87-inch reach, huge guy, powerful. And I never thought he was an Ngannou, but I thought he could have got some wins. But man, he just won in the UFC and he fell off a mountain. What can we say? And yeah, this guy was just never really good, I guess. Maybe he can get some wins on the regional scene and come make his way back to the UFC, but I doubt it. You just can't develop grappling. Maybe at heavyweight you can. He might actually have a shot. Who knows? Good luck to Rebellis of Spain, but yeah, not a UFC fighter anymore. Let's move on to the next one. We got Amir Albazi, who was recently fraud checked by Brandon Moreno. This was an insane fraud check. Not really insane. I mean, I kind of expected it to happen, but a lot of the narrative going into the fight with Brandon Moreno is that Moreno he's going to be washed. He doesn't want to fight anymore. He's taking breaks from MMA, saying he's burnt out. Amir Albazi's hungry. He's coming from like a 1.5 year layoff off of neck surgery. He's going to want to get in there and get a win. Now, listen, I thought that Amir Albazi clearly lost to Kai for our friends, but I still thought he was a decent fighter. He's 17-1, 5-0 in the UFC coming into this fight. And yeah, I thought he was maybe going to be able to out-grapple Brandon Moreno and even win some of the striking exchanges. But no, Brandon Moreno beat this guy pillar to post on the feet, exposed his striking, and exposed him for just being overrated overall. First of all, dude, why does Amir Albazi look like an NPC? I don't know. Just look at him, dude. He looks like an NPC. I can't explain it. If you know, you know. But he got absolutely fraud checked by Brandon Moreno, the former champion. And yeah, he looked terrible in that fight. Hopefully he can bounce back. Or maybe not hopefully. This guy's a boring fighter, guys. Do we really want Amir Albazi to bounce back? Listen, I don't want to be a hater. So hopefully Amir Albazi can get a win and maybe he can have a scrap in his next fight and get a dub. But yeah, guys, that's it for the video. Let me know what you guys think. This is some of the biggest fraud checks in UFC history, in my opinion. These are guys that a lot of these guys were just touted as like the big next up-and-comer. Some of them were on big win streaks. Some of them got fraud checked in a sense of their cardio or striking. That's what this video was about. Which guys were touted high and got fraud checked in one way or another. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Leave some fraud checks in the comments in this video. Leave in the comments some fraud checks that I left out of this video that I didn't get to, that maybe you guys would add. And yeah, as always, guys, thank you for watching. I always appreciate it. This is a longer video. I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you watched to the end, you're a real one. Like and subscribe, and I'm out, guys. Peace.